Hi, my name is Randy Myers. Welcome back to another episode of An Animated Conversation. My guest today is Ruben Chavez.
I think Hanna-Barbera kind of trained me to do that. And now I'm doing work for another studio and I don't even work for them. But no one was teaching it. No one showed you how to do it. So you have a nice mishmash, you know? In the worst case scenario, I've gotten that. I don't think he was who he is now, but he was moving up very quickly.
Ruben!
Hello, hello.
Thanks for doing this. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah.
So, Ruben.
Yes, sir.
Have you looked at your IMDb lately? It's several pages long, Ruben. So, how long you been in animation, Ruben?
I want to say close to 40 years.
Yeah? And you went to school in Long Beach and Art Center?
Yeah, I did Long Beach for a few years, and then I transferred over to Art Center, and then got beat up over there for another 3 years.
Where did the love of art and animation start?
Comics and looking at TV and everything is kind of what started for me. I was, I originally wanted to get into comics, and I liked animation. I didn't think it was going to happen that way, and then all of a sudden, comics, everything was on the East Coast, and I lived on the West Coast, and I just kind of thought, don't want to move, don't want to uproot. There's too much going on this end. And the pay wasn't that great either, so if you were going to do it, you really had to love it. And then I said, well, let me see what's going on with animation. And I started off as an illustrator, and the next thing you know, I'm knocking on the door of Filmation Studios.
Were you into it as a teen?
Yeah, as a kid. Like everyone else, you're growing up with all the Warners and the Disney cartoons, and you're looking at them, and I had my favorites, whatnot, and then it just, I loved all. I was actually more into drawing than I was painting, actually.
Oh, so where did the painting come in?
When I went to school, I didn't feel rounded out. I just thought I needed to kind of I knew nothing of color. Believe it or not, I was drawing characters and superheroes and whatnot. And the next thing you know, I said, well, let me start learning some color. And it just kind of fell into that.
So you kind of had what we might consider a traditional, classically trained painter kind of education.
Yeah.
Did you know, at the end of that, you were going to get into animation? Or was it just, I'm going to do this and see if there's a career out there for me?
Yeah, pretty much. I was figuring I wanted to illustrate, and back in that time, they didn't really have people hunting you down. It was more like you're kind of just, okay, you had to pound the pavement, as the saying went, portfolio in hand, knocking on doors and getting a lot of rejections and telling you, not now, kid, maybe later, and finally, I went over to Filmation, and they seen my portfolio, and they brought me in as an assistant.
The young people nowadays, Ruben, may not know what you mean by a portfolio, because nowadays they have websites and blogs. They submit everything digitally. What did you have in your portfolio when you were first submitting to Filmation?
When I was first submitting to them, I had a lot of original drawings, life drawings, then some paintings, a lot of originals. Because you just didn't, your portfolio cases were big. They weren't these little things, or, now they had some small ones, or back in the 90s or whatever, they had some small ones. You could start printing them out and whatnot. But before, it was you're painting on illustration board and doing the drawings on the paper. So they'd be flipping through all the original stuff so, they could actually see your work.
Was your work in your portfolio stuff you had done for class, personal things? Somebody who didn't know they were going to get into animation, was it a bunch of landscapes or life drawing or what?
The nice thing is, when I was trying to get into the business, my good friend of my wife's, her friend happened to be Dave Brain, who was a well-known animator. And so she said, you know what, why don't you go over there and talk to him? and kind of see what he's got to offer. He was real cordial, real nice about it. And I went over to the Disney Studios. I think they were working on, I want to say, The Fox and the Hound is around the time that they were working on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I went into the old animation building before it was even renovated. So it looks like this terrible dark hospital.
Yep.
And he was in one of the rooms, and I'm walking in with my portfolio case, and he had a few assistant animators there with him. And I remember he looked at my book and gave me some pointers and said, okay, do this, don't do that, show this, don't show that. And he said, I'm going to take you over and talk to Don Hahn, who was the production manager at the time. I don't think he was who he is now, but he was moving up very quickly. And he did the same thing. He kind of looked at my stuff and said, you know what, why don't you go to some other studios and then come back to us? I said, okay. So I went off and kind of got my tips and pointers. And that's when I went over to Art Center and learned a lot more for 3 more years. And then that's when I had my portfolio. I knew what I put in there, paintings, scenic backgrounds, whatever. Walked in and showed the director of color at the time was Irv Kaplan. And he brought me in. He said, okay, I'm going to bring you in as an assistant. And I said, okay, sounds good, and that's how it got started.
You said 3 years at Art Center. Was that to get a degree or just to get as much as you could under your belt before you left, or what?
Well, it was funny because when I was transferring over from Long Beach, Art Center was only taking so many credits. They weren't accepting some of the art credits.
Mm-hmm.
In their opinion, it was not up to their caliber. And so it was like a year's worth of work from Long Beach at the time that I just lost and had to redo again at Art Center. So, I mean, for that length of time, I should have had a master's, but.
So all traditional painting techniques at Art Center?
Yeah. Working with gouache, acrylics, watercolors, inks, the whole kit and caboodle. I mean, I worked on all of that. And I think it was like doing traditional all the way for 15 years. I think you and I were working together, what was it, on Catstone Dance? And that was, I think, the second to the last show that I ever worked. No, Iron Giant was the last show I worked on traditionally.
Oh, really? You guys didn't do anything on the computer after you painted? You didn't touch them up or anything?
We didn't do them. They had a computer department.
Oh, got it.
Doing the touch-up at the time, but we were still painting traditionally, so we had the big giant pans and everything.
Right.
Yeah, and I remember Brad Bird would come over and look at the originals at each one of our desks, which was kind of nice. Now they're somewhere in some warehouse in San Francisco, I think the last I heard.
They're in a vault like Indiana Jones. All the work we've done that's on paper or canvas or anything it's in a vault someplace stashed, yeah. Or some executive it was given to them as a gift at the end of the production.
Yeah, nicely framed and
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Filmation was after Art Center.
Yeah.
You did a bunch of the TV stuff there, the He-Mans and She-Ras and that kind of stuff?
Mm-hmm. He-Man, She-Ra, worked on that for a few years. I think we were on there.
So you cut your teeth on the Filmation, which is Filmation had a quick turnaround, smaller budgets, tighter productions. So you must have had a deadline of what you had to produce every week.
I remember at the time I was told you have to do 20 to 25 fields a week. So a pan would sometimes equate as 3 fields. And that was your quota that you had to meet. So you had to produce 20 to 25 a week.
And I'm guessing they varied in difficulty. Some were probably just a color background, and then others had a lot more detail.
Yeah, some were real detailed. But for me, being an assistant, I was not getting the real complex ones at the time. I was learning on the job, which was kind of nice production-wise, but you were hungry to kind of do those big, beautiful shots. And it took a while later, started doing them later. But in the beginning, you're just trying to make sure you don't get fired.
You probably weren't making that much money.
Compared to what I was making before, it was great. Yeah, it wasn't much compared to the money it is now.
Yeah.
And as an assistant, what was I getting a week? I think back then, if I was trying to remember. I was getting rent was $185 a month. So,
Wow.
and then I was making because you're starting you off at 500 a week, which at that time was fantastic. You know, he was like, "Oh my God, 500 a week! I've got enough to pay the rent and got groceries, and I got 3 more weeks of pay to come." So it was nice. It's a lot better than what they were paying for. I think comics were paying something like 1,800 a month.
I know it's so weird how comics are revered, admired, and the artists, the guys that create these amazing pieces of artwork that people cherish. I mean, they're worth thousands, hundreds of thousands now, some of them, and they get so little for doing all that work, and they literally kill themselves. We're staying up all night, working weekends just to meet a deadline, and and then nothing. It's just
nothing. I mean, and there's only those few bucks that you hear about. Now I think it's a lot different. They're getting contracts, but I mean, Stan Lee, I mean, he was like, had the whole monopoly on everything back then.
Yeah.
So I had thought about it for a little while, but then I thought going to New York, God, and newly married, no, that ain't gonna happen.
So you were born and raised here in Southern California?
Here in LA. Yeah.
And then you got married here, found a career here, and you're still here in Southern California.
Yeah. Yeah, still here.
Okay. Hey,
and put myself central. I remember the golden rule was to get yourself between all the studios at the time, which is a good idea because a lot of the studios, like Filmation, was out in the valley.
So let's go back to that 80s. In the 80s, how many studios existed that you were aware of back then?
I think it was, Deke was around, Warner Brothers, Filmation, Hanna-Barbera. And then they had a lot of smaller ones too, which I don't recall hitting those as much. I think I did Filmation, and then after I was at Filmation, I went over to Hanna-Barbera in the late 80s into the 90s.
Yeah, because that's when you transitioned from Hanna-Barbera TV to the Turner Features stuff, right?
Right. Some of the big feature thing was going on. Disney started it with The Lion King, I believe, and then everyone wanted to do features. And so we were busy doing television at the time, and it ended up going where, I think that's where you and I kind of got together at Turner Feature.
Yep, Turner, that was the first time. But you had worked, did you work when you were at Hanna-Barbera? Did you work with Gendy and McCracken and Renzetti and those guys helping out on their stuff?
Yeah, they were just getting started. And so at the time, they had a pool of, in our background department, there was, at the height, we had 25 painters at one time. So we were being loaned out to different projects because there were so many projects that were going on at the time. And I think when Turner was getting started and David Kirshner was getting everything started with them, Gendy was just coming out of school, and Craig McCracken was coming out, and then Mike Milo was doing a few shows. And I think it was What a Cartoon, I think it was called.
Yeah, it's quite the alumni. You had Butch Hartman, Seth MacFarlane was there. There was a whole bunch of just Pat Ventura was doing shorts for them.
Yeah, there's a lot of voiceover actors there too, and you'd pass them in the hallways every day because the studio was so small. You'd see everyone, and so all the big names you were passing, and they got to know you after a while and say, "Hi, how you doing? Pretty good. What are you working on?" And you'd have a little conversation. Then everyone would go their separate way. McFarlane, he was their board artist at the time, I think.
Yeah, he was just getting his start, and now he's skyrocketed to fame and fortune.
He's skyrocketed now.
Well, so is Gendy with finally getting his chance at features, and but so before I get too much further into this, Ruben, how do you define what it is you do for an animated television show or a feature? Because it's yeah, well, it could be described very simplistically, but I want to hear you describe what your role is.
Well, you would call us, we're called background painters, but we're almost like production designers because we're working very closely with the director and with the art director, unless you're art directing. And we're trying to get the look and style of the show going. So color-wise, the mood and whatnot, if it hasn't already been established. And sometimes the art director will do that, and then we're just following it and doing all the sets, the background sets, and we're doing all the keys. we don't do any of the production like they did back in the 70s and 80s. That gets sent to other studios, but we do all the main establishing shots. So that's what I would say what we do is setting up the key scenes in color for all the shows.
And then you have to either follow what an art director or a show creator or runner has in mind, and you have to somehow figure out this style that they're pulling from their head. And I'm sure they're throwing, oh, we want a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you have to kind of figure out like a chef. All right, here's the ingredients, and it still has to taste good and work. And you're not the only one. There's several other people who are doing backgrounds, and it all has to look seamless, like the same person is doing it. It can't stand out. And I'm guessing you also need some information, like, is it at night? Because that affects color. Is it during the day? Is there fog or smog, or, what is the setting or mood?
Also the style of the paint as well, the technique, whatever the art director are looking for. And this one show that I'm working on right now for Fox is kind of, the style really wasn't set. We kind of had this one look that they wanted. It was kind of like they were saying, well, we're using 101 Dalmatians as a starting point. And you kind of go, okay. And so you start pulling reference from that. And how it's evolved from that to what we're doing now is totally different. But it's like you said, all of a sudden the director has his 2 cents, the art director saying, well, I kind of want it to go in this direction. And so there you are. When you have that time to develop, it's kind of nice. When you don't have the time, that's when it's not fun, because they want it yesterday.
That time to develop, I haven't worked, well, in television, I haven't worked on anything that's had that time. And it always, I tell people, usually season 1, you're still developing the show because you're figuring out a lot of that stuff. And I think people think you must have spent months or years developing that show before it went on air. And the truth is, we're still figuring it out. And then hopefully by the start of season 2, if you get a season 2, you got most of it figured out.
Which is the hardest thing in TV production, kind of maintain continuity, especially when people are coming and going. That's the hardest thing. But like what we were talking about before, trying to get that style down. Sometimes, like you said, we don't really get it until the second season. And in this show that I'm working on right now, we're finally getting a look. It's all mishmash, for us that recognize it. But other people are kind of like, I've never noticed, We do, because that's what we're trained for.
Are you kind of a student of style? Do you pay attention to shows and what kind of styles their backgrounds are done in?
Yeah, it's almost by default. It almost happens, you kind of got, I think Hanna-Barbera kind of trained me to do that. We had at one time, we had 6 shows running at the same time. And each one had a different style, a distinct different style. We had the Flintstones, we had something else, about 4 other shows that we were doing that were just totally different from that look. I think we had the Jetson movie at one point. So all of a sudden you're trying to get this real nice airbrushy look, nice smooth lines, and then you get real textural with the Flintstones. And then you get some other shows that Gendy and Craig were creating, and that was yet another style that they're looking for. And so you became a jack of all trades after a while, so you got used to it.
And I want you to talk a little bit about what the material you get when you're doing a background, when you're assigned on a show, what's handed to you to work from.
Every show is different. Obviously, the one thing we always get is the animatic nowadays, where it used to be the storyboard before. Now we're getting a full animatic, which is nice. For us, you kind of get the style and the flow of the show, who the characters are. You get the characters. And if they have even been established in color, you get their color. Sometimes that has not been done. And then you get a lot of reference on whatever the director and the art director are thinking of as far as what are we going to go for as far as the look of the show. And in this last show that I'm working on right now, it had that 101 Dalmatians kind of feel. So you get all the reference from 101 Dalmatians, and you start pulling all that kind of stuff color-wise and trying to see what they want to bring into it that's similar, what they want to change. Then you get the drawings. Then you get all the background designs. Sometimes you'll get clean. Sometimes they're just concept. So that's still in progress. It just depends what time of the show you're getting into. Is it in the middle, in the beginning, how the schedule is?
You said you get the animatics or the boards.
Mhm.
Who's design
Characters.
characters? Who's designing the background? Is somebody else designing a line drawn background and handing it to you based on the
Yeah,
board?
sometimes if a production designer has just established the look or the art, or they've already kind of have an idea they want, then they'll get in some BG designers to come in, and that's all they're doing is the hand-drawn line work. So they can kind of get the skeleton, the drawing going. And then they bring us in for the color. Yeah, it's different phases. Sometimes you get a nice clean drawing. Sometimes you're getting concepts, which they're still trying to figure out as well. So it just depends what show you're on.
Do you ever get just the storyboard blown up to size?
Yeah, and in the worst case scenario, I've gotten that. We kind of have an idea, and here's a stick figure, and here's a line for the horizon, and a pyramid for the mountain. There you are. It's a day shot, and give me something. Pretty much, it's been to that point as well.
You ever have to deal with like poor perspective or poor drawing skills, and then you have to kind of fix or do what you can to make it work better?
Yeah. Unless they want to have the show style to be totally off, and then everything works. And in that case, it's fantastic. But when they're more of like when you and I were working on G.I. Joe Renegades, it was all that perspective drawing and all this stuff that had to be just right. And you didn't want the angles to be too stagnant. So yeah, it just depends what you're getting.
So you kind of ran the gamut too. You've done action shows, you've done primetime animated shows, you did some feature work. Did you ever do any preschool stuff?
Yeah. I did some stuff for Angelina Ballerina.
Okay.
It was a thing for SD Entertainment. It was actually I think it was coming on PBS, and it was all CG. So, and I was working with one of the directors, Davis Doy, who's been in the industry forever. And he called me up and said, "Hey, I need an art director. Can you help me out?" And I said, "Sure." And for the next year, I was busy helping him on that show with preschool.
That was CG, you said. Tell me thoughts and feelings, the difference between how you started out, everything painted, real paints, real brushes, versus the CG world.
Yeah, that was a transition. I mean, I think the last painting I did is in 2000. And then we were all switching over to digital. And of course, the software of choice at the time, which is still popular now, is Photoshop. But no one was teaching it. No one showed you how to do it. We were kind of figuring it out on our own. There was no classes. So everyone was kind of like, okay, we either learn this or we're out of a job. So, and meanwhile, you'd be discovering how to do certain techniques. And I ended up teaching afterwards because you just figured it out enough, Now, of course, there's classes and everyone can do it. But at the time, the transition was sink or swim. You figure it out, and who had the computer first. And of course, the software programs keep on changing on a 3 to 6 month basis. So you're trying to just keep up, let alone learn at the same time. So
do you talk a lot with other people who do what you do? I know you have a lot of friends in background departments because you've worked with them and you've become friends, but do you guys talk a lot? Do you have conversations about the softwares or the shows or anything? Do you guys share ideas and thoughts about stuff?
In the beginning, we did more of it than we do now. Now you kind of just know it. And so now the conversation, instead of the software, whereas before in the beginning, everyone was kind of like, "Hey, how did you figure out this technique? How did you do this blend? And how did this work out? I know how to do it in Paint, but how do you do it digitally?" And, now it's just, it's conversations about what show you're working on. How's it looking? Is it CG or is it 2D? And that kind of the conversations we have more of now than what we had in the beginning, where you're trying to learn techniques and whatnot. I think everyone kind of knows, at least in my circle, we kind of know our techniques and how to do it. And now it's more like, what show you working on? What's the style? Is the writing good? And
I was just telling somebody the other day that there's two reactions you can have when you're telling friends or family what you're working on. You can say, "I'm working on that show," or "I'm working on that show."
Yes.
Yeah, and you always kind of hope it's the first one, but sometimes you never know.
Yeah, I had some of those where you're working on a show and they kind of go, oh, and you say, well, it's paying the bills, but it's, because you're going to get those. You're not always going to get the shows that you want, that wonderful show that, that's the only thing I want to work on. Other times you're thinking, I want to work, I want to stay busy, have a job, I don't want to be unemployed. And so you take what you take, and yeah, you can say no, but sometimes you do it for the people that are working on it too. You end up having that network where you say, well, I like this director, or I like this producer, or I like these writers, or I like the crew that they're on there. We all get along. We all know each other. So I like working with them. When the show's not the ideal show that you want to work on. At other times, it's just you have no idea. This show that I'm working on right now, it's actually a really nice show. It's but I didn't know anyone except for, I think, the producer who knew me, and I think the art director knew of me. And sometimes that'll happen.
Is it a younger crew?
Yeah, it's a whole younger crew. There's a few of us who are older, so we have a nice mishmash.
So you remember when you came into the industry, what you were like? Obviously, you know what you're like now. Do the young people coming up into the industry now, just starting out, are they exactly like you were when you were starting out? Are they a little different, smarter, more talented, wiser about the medium, anything? What are you noticing?
The one thing I do notice is they're more informed than we were. Because of the fact that what we had when I started off, it was word of mouth. We didn't have, the internet was barely getting started. And so your exposure and what you know now compared to what was when I was coming out the door is just worlds different. You have so much to feed off of. And we'd have to go and get physical books to kind of reference artwork, or you'd go to Comic-Con was the big thing to go to, because that's where you got to see some of the artwork. And I'm showing my age when I say this, because I remember when the first time I went to Comic-Con was when you can actually walk up and there was no fee, and you could walk up to your favorite artist and have your comic book and open it up, and he'd be right there just with no one around him. Yeah. John Buscema, or Jack Kirby, and they're signing comic books for you. And you'd say, okay, you'd have a little conversation, and off on your way. Now it's this big zoo. So I think it's the information that's more so now than ever.
Well, did you get some comic books signed by those guys?
Yes, I did. And unfortunately, when I was a kid, I lost a few of them just because I had been off to college, and then I came back and my grandmother got rid of them. But I was able to keep a few. I had some in a box, and those I still have, which you kind of cherish and go, wow, just to see those,
And you'll always have the memories, Ruben. You'll always have the memories.
Great. Yeah, it's fantastic. So it's that information thing that they have now. I mean, kids coming out now, I remember going to Art Center a couple of years ago, because Disney was recruiting, and they wanted me to kind of see what was coming in the door. So when I went over there, you're actually going to see their artwork. It was at the Pasadena Convention Center. Right. And so I'm walking around looking at portfolios, and everyone has their artwork up on the wall, and they're standing waiting for you to pass by. We could never do that. It was just pound the pavement, start knocking on doors, and see who opens it, So it's a lot of difference now.
One of the things that I noticed that's the same, I don't know if you noticed this, is I remember coming to the industry and I was like, I just want any job. Give me a chance. I don't have, much on my credit list, if anything, so I'll take anything, commercials, freelance, anything. And the kids are still like that, but like you, it's nice when you get to the point where you can say no. You can pass on something, or like you also said, you can choose to take on a project, work on a project because of the other people on there, because you don't always get that opportunity.
Yeah, you get a lot of that, where a lot of the kids now, there's a nice mix. I was encouraged, for some of the students were hungry. They wanted just to get in, which shows that they have that enthusiasm in them. And then you have the ones who are picky. and you're kind of just going, well, that's okay, but how's it going to affect you later on? And there's a difference. The spectrum is just different now. So yeah, I mean, when you and I were kind of going in, we would take anything. I was taking any illustration job just to kind of have something to put in my portfolio so I can show. Because a lot of the times when you'd go to the studio, the first thing they would tell you is, so this is all student work, huh? You don't have any actual real work? No, I don't. And this is what I'm trying to get a job for. And I don't know if you get much of that now. I wish they would. I think you're starting to get it, but that makes you hungry. And the hunger is what drives the creative juices going.
Yeah, when I lecture at times, I put up a slide that says 10 things that require zero talent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the stuff. It's funny because it's the stuff that I think makes a difference. I mean, I would rather work with somebody that did 7 or 8 out of the 10 things on this list than the most talented person who is just got a bad attitude, isn't courteous or kind or fun to work with or anything. I don't care how talented you are. I'd rather work with the person who shows up on time, doesn't push back on notes, easy to work with, all that stuff, great attitude. That's the person I want to work with because they'll work hard to figure it out, figure out the style of the show or what needs to be done. Robert Alvarez always has a saying, which is, your job is to get this done. So you have to figure it out. That's your job. If you don't know, like you said, you figure it out.
Yeah, the bottom line is get the job done, get the show done, and you're right. I mean, it was a lot of times when I was even art directing, and the people I bring in, I'm filtering through the people to see who's going to be someone I can work with, as opposed to the prima donna who wants to do it their way and is going to just affect production in so many ways that I don't want to even think about. Because the bottom line is get the show done, get it done right so that they like it and you can do some more, but and that's basically it. You want to work with people who work harmoniously with each other. So you have to be a person that's able to bend and do things. You're not going to get it always your way, but if you're wanting to learn, that's part of it.
So let me ask you this then. Are there shows or movies that you've worked on that maybe you aren't the most proud of and you see them now and you kind of cringe a little bit, like either that background was bad or that experience was bad? Yeah
if it was like the background was bad, there were some shows where you just kind of go, oh, I remember the headaches that we had on that show and all the time and all the back and forth that you would get. And then when you see the final product that was done overseas and a lot of the work gets translated, and then when it comes back, it's not what you're going to be giving them sometimes. One of the sayings, one of the big background painters I used to work with, Jim Hickey, that he used to say, goes, if we get 40% back of what we give them, we're doing pretty good. And I think that still holds true today, with a lot of the studios, wherever they may be. And it has nothing to do with what they can or can't do. It's just sometimes they're so overloaded. And so it depends upon where your show falls in the whole scheme of things. Is it the show that's going to get the A team, or is it going to get the B team or the C team, or heaven knows if they're farming out to wherever? And, and that's what it comes down to. And it's money. I get it. So yeah, there are some of those productions that you worked on when you kind of just cringe and go, well, it wasn't exactly what I was hoping for, but in the whole scheme of things, it's a learning experience, is what it is.
Absolutely, yeah. You learn from every one of them. And then the other thing that I think younger people are starting to become more aware of today is scene counts. Mm-hmm. Like how many scenes and how many backgrounds have to be generated, because either somebody in-house like yourself or somebody at the overseas studios has to generate a background for it. So you have to be smart about how many shots, how many cuts. For television, anyway. Features is a different animal, but
sure is.
I think nowadays too often young people go, well, I got the episode to 11 minutes, and you go, yeah, but it's like 400 scenes. Nobody's going to be able to produce that in the amount of time that we have.
And they're not understanding the production side. the nice thing that I had the advantage of is I was working on the production side in Filmation, so I got to see production. And then when I went to Hanna-Barbera, because I had that experience, it let me go overseas to supervise on several occasions on several shows because I knew production, and you can see how the pipeline works. And that's so critical a lot of times. If they don't know how the pipeline works, then you're just kind of, so a lot of times when people have asked, hey, there's an opportunity to go overseas, should I take it? And I said, yes, do it. For one, it's like you get a free ticket to go somewhere where you probably would never pay to go. It may not be the best place you want to go, but sometimes it is. And the people and what you're going to learn and what you're going to get from going overseas and coming back is priceless.
100%. I mean, you see, like you said, when you get work back, you don't truly appreciate the people who are doing it until you go there and you see either the conditions or the pressure they're on to turn stuff around. Sometimes the problem is just communication. The people internally at the studios aren't communicating with one another, or you're seeing how what you're giving them isn't being interpreted correctly, so then you can alter that and fix that. So it's beneficial in so many ways. And if nothing else, I think everybody comes back appreciating the conditions, the work conditions we have here, because sometimes they're not very nice at other studios around the world.
I mean, a lot of times they've gone to third world countries. And the several times I was in the Philippines, I was in Taipei, Korea, and you get to learn how it is to live there. And the working conditions are just, not what we're used to here. And when I was in one of the shows that I was in, we were in this 10-story building, and there was 10 productions going on. And I was being called on other productions because I was the one supervisor from the color that they had, and they couldn't get communicated with whoever studio at the time that it was. It's funny, I think I was working for Hanna-Barbera at the time, and then someone came down from a Disney project and said, we need to have you look at this. And I go, this is not even my show. This is not even what I'm working on, not even my studio. And she says, yes, but we can't get a hold of anyone and we need approval before we can get going. So I said, okay, fine. So I started looking at all the characters, the backgrounds. I made my notes, did the changes, and it got sent on its way. It must have done fine because I never heard back from them. But we got a big kick out of it. I said, now I'm doing work for another studio and I don't even work for them. But it was like that, they're just so overloaded and so busy. So it's priceless to work in a place like that and get all the production experience, because that you can't teach that.
So let's talk a little bit about how what you do has to contribute without distracting from an episode or a movie, because you guys are designing and building the sets for animated television shows and movies, but backgrounds aren't supposed to be the star.
Right.
So how do you approach that, getting the background to work with the story and the characters and not be distracting?
Well, the thing is, obviously, composition, you want the background to not be overpowering. The key thing is, you want to make sure the background is setting the mood, but it's not overpowering color-wise. That gets all established in the beginning with the director and the art director, unless you're art directing, then you kind of just say, I want to make sure that we're paying attention to the characters in the story, because that's what it's all about. And one of the Maurice Noble used to say, I remember when we were working on Catstone Dance, he used to say, if they're paying attention to the background, then the story's not working, And so you want to make sure it's not overpowering. You want to set the mood. If they're standing in the center stage, you want that center stage area to be lit just enough, and everything off to the sides, it doesn't matter. It's environment. And it's supposed to set, and that's what your goal is in every shot. You can't get it in every shot, but in the key shots, you try to go for that, and that's what you shoot for.
So what was the first project you got to be an art director on?
Ooh, good question. I'm trying to remember now. It was for Jim Henson Studios. I was art directing on 3 direct-to-video shows. I think the Weinstein Company at the time was kind of co-producing it as well. And that was over in Hollywood.
Was that the Charlie Chaplin Studios?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, the old Charlie Chaplin studio. I think that was the first gig that I did as art directing, and it was 3 direct videos. We had a shoestring budget, of course, which meant we didn't have much money at the time, but we did it. We were doing production keys and sending it. I think the production was being done in India.
So were they CG or 2D?
And it was a CG show to top it all off. So I'm art directing a CG show that I had never art directed before, but they liked my portfolio, and we just went from there. We had a few people that were working there. Eric Robles, who's now over at Nickelodeon, was one of my artists. Mm-hmm. And I had a pretty good slew of artists in that team.
Were they all in-house, or were you freelancing to them?
A few of them were in-house. We'd have to freelance just because of the facilities that we had and the time frame. And and it was just like, hurry up, get it done. We want it yesterday. And then right after that, I finished off that project and jumped onto the Simpson movie.
And did what? Did just paint backgrounds on Simpsons?
Yeah, on that one, it was already, the team was there. They just needed more painters. So a couple of us jumped onto that show. And then we didn't sleep for 9 months, because that was a crazy production where we were working crazy hours, and the pay was great. The food was good. They were delivering everything you wanted, and it did good. It kept us busy,
Yeah, it's funny how movie productions start off with all the time in the world. And then I don't know why it gets all crunched towards the end. I don't know if it's notes or just the process. And you find yourself, like you said, eating at the studio, longer hours, overtime, coming in on weekends. It's like, we had all that time. Why are we all killing ourselves?
We were using it all up. They were using it up in development, and the budget was just getting chewed up alive. And then now all of a sudden you're kind of going, what happened? Where did it go? Why did it all of a sudden? Why don't we have time anymore? Because they used up everything in the beginning.
Do you have a preference between TV and features?
I'm just used to TV. Features is nice. I mean, I really liked it on Cat Stone Dance, and we were working on that in Iron Giant. We had time to do the stuff on there, and I think those are the exception to the rule. Even when the most recent show that I art directed, Candace Against the Universe, in the beginning we didn't have any time, and then suddenly they gave us this big block of time and money, which was priceless, because we needed that to kind of get the show developed the way we wanted to do it. And it was fun. We got to play with it and do some color.
I wanted to ask you about notes too. What's your approach when you get notes? Are you kind of I'm just going to be quiet, whether I agree with it or not, address the note, move it forward, or do you feel the need to say something, push back, that kind of stuff? What are your thoughts on getting notes?
Generally, if I get notes, if I feel strongly about something, I'll say it. But 9 times out of 10, I'm kind of like, the notes aren't that big to start off with. They're more subjective than anything else. Everything is subjective the way I look at it. There's never anything wrong. It's just different. So that's the way I kind of look at when I get the notes. It's just this director's view of how they want it to be done. So let's try to help them get that vision going. And then if we have some problems, then you can bring it up and say, wanted to see if it would work out the way you wanted to do it. Obviously, it's not going in that direction. What about this? And then that's when you can throw in your 2 cents. So I think time has taught me to kind of just learn to sit back, listen. In the beginning, you want to give these 101 notes and tell them, like, I have a better idea than what you said, but you learn to be quiet.
Do you ever feel like the note process reminds you of being back at Art Center or back at college, getting your work critiqued?
Yeah, I mean, if the one thing Art Center taught me was you get a skin of steel, because it's just they beat you up over there. They just really beat you up, and so if you're not used to that, it really affects your ego. It really affects how you think you are. And so that was the one thing that I was real grateful about at Art Center, that they taught us. And I think they're still doing it that way, where they're just really beating you up to let you know, this is how it is. You're never going to have it your way all the time. But when you do get to, put in your 2 cents, at least you've developed a tough hide and you can kind of stand up to it. And it teaches you, it gives you a little character, I think.
Speaking of art center, see, when I was coming up, it was if you wanted to do animation or storyboards or character design, you came out of Cal Arts.
Yeah.
All the background designers and painters came out of Art Center.
Right.
Yeah. Nowadays, there's a lot more schools that have programs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious if you're seeing people still come from Art Center for background work, or do you see them come from all over the place?
Actually, I'm starting to see more coming from some of the Cal states, which have been producing some really good stuff. Surprisingly, Art Center has they're still producing some of the background designers, art directors, production designers, illustrators. And, a lot of the Cal State schools, like Cal State Fullerton, has been producing some really good artists coming out of there. So they're coming from different places now, which is good. It's encouraging to see compared to when I was going to school.
And is the level of work, up to par with where you were when you were coming out of school?
Yeah, it's a little different now because when I was coming out of school, we were learning techniques, how to paint traditionally. So how you mastered that technique as far as, with the paintbrush and the airbrush and the Badger brush back then. And now it's more learning the software and whatnot. It is different. It's a lot different than it was when I was going there. So it's just the approach is different. The talent level is there. You can see it. One thing I do notice in the students, and that's why it's really important, is a lot of times you'll see a beautiful piece of artwork and you'll say, great, how long did that take you to make? And that tells you a lot in that, because all of a sudden they'll say, well, I worked on this for 3 months. And you're thinking, okay, well, in animation, that's not going to happen unless you're in some, wonderful development project that's got oodles of money and you've got all the time in the world. Otherwise, especially for television or for streaming nowadays, yeah, you got to do it that kind of quality, but in about a few days.
So I'm curious about something. You started out traditionally and then kind of were introduced to the digital world. Do the young people now just paint digitally? Do any of them do traditional paintings? Do they do airbrushing or oil paintings or anything, or watercolors? Or are they just...
That I've talked to have, and it was worrying me for a while because I've always felt you need to have that traditional background as a base, as a foundation. You need that strong foundation to understand how color works traditionally. Then you can go to digital. I have talked to some who have never picked up a brush or a pencil or a pen. And it's kind of sad because you're not really well-rounded, in my opinion. You need to have that kind of foundation to kind of get you to understand and appreciate the medium a little bit more. So now you're starting to see some saying, yes, we are learning traditionally, and this is what we're doing. And I'm thinking, great, it's not being abandoned. It's like books. I love books and I'll love them all my life, and everyone was going on digital tablets. It's kind of that kind of same thing.
Do you see any evolution with background design, background color, background paint? Do you see an evolution where you were talking about started traditional, went to primary Photoshop?
Yeah.
Do you see anywhere to grow for what you do?
Yeah, I mean, heck, they're going into live action now. And like the one example is The Mandalorian. If you see a lot of their scenic backgrounds, because everything is going CG, which is already, they're using that as their environment. And that's kind of what us as painters used to do traditionally, doing that production painting or drawing, which still has to be done. But now they're able to take that thing and make it three-dimensional and start putting it into an environment. And so it seems like the evolution is going in that direction more. And the softwares are just starting to merge more as well, too. They're not as complex and they weren't as tricky as they were when we first started off. They're getting to be more fluid. At least that's how I'm seeing it.
And they're faster, too.
They're faster,
computers are faster. You can render faster, all that stuff. Yeah.
Man. The funny part is I remember we had in Cats Don't Dance. It just shows how fast everything is gone. They had a computer room and they it was this big giant room, and there was this big processor in the middle, and we were told this is 40 megabytes, and at the time we we're kind of going, wow. And now you think, oh my God, 40 megabytes. I have some files that are bigger than that. And but it's how things have changed.
It's funny. I remember back during that time on PageMaster, Cats Don't Dance, the Turner stuff, and then some of the Disney and Blue stuff. When there was a computer effect, it was so impressive. There was some element. It wasn't even a movie wasn't done CG, but an element. You're like, ooh, that's really impressive, or that's really distracting and done poorly. And I'm noticing all the goofiness. And it's interesting you mentioned The Mandalorian, because on Iron Giant, there was a nice blend of the 2D, 3D stuff. Nothing looked like it didn't belong. And The Mandalorian's kind of the same thing. It's like, if you can do it and it's not distracting and it's not taking you away from the story, like you said earlier, that's kind of the key component. It's it's just how can you best tell the story visually?
You know, and that comes also, I think, from how the director kind of sets it all up, from opening the scene to establishing the location, introducing the characters, and starting with the storyline and going from there and staging everything. It's all about staging, lighting, and that's kind of how we're working harmoniously together. Like you said, in Iron Giant, even to this day, if you look at it, it still works. There's nothing about it that tells you, oh, that kind of looks funny. It's not working. It still actually works, which is really, really refreshing to see.
Hey, I wanted to ask you, before I forget, with art directing, there's an element, because art directing is you're managing a department, managing other artists. Do you like art directing?
I do. You know, there's a plus and minus to it. You're going to get a lot of extra work from it because you're going to have to work with the directors and the producers and the writers. There's a lot of extra hours that go into art directing. And, you know, that's the part where you're having to manage the people. If you're not used to it, and I got introduced to that really quick at Hanna-Barbera because I became assistant background supervisor there. So I had to manage 25 people. So I had to figure out right there and then if this is something I like or something I don't like. I guess I was pretty good at it because I'm doing it. But I don't like the long hours. That's the only thing. It's the only part I don't like. I do like the part where you get to creatively have input and put your own kind of little signature onto things, which is very rewarding. At times, sometimes the director and producer may have their own idea and they want to do it their way, and you're basically just managing the guys and the whole group. And so it depends on the production, but I do like it.
Did your the amount of work that you have to produce, the amount of backgrounds, does it get reduced as a manager, or are you still trying to produce the same number of backgrounds as you would if you were just on staff someplace?
I was doing, like, for In Candace Against the Universe, I was doing a lot of color keys and scripting. I was doing a lot of color scripting, which is fun because you get to take a lot of the storyboard panels, color them in, and especially like the song sequences, and then you're going to have, so that part I kind of key everything up. I'll do a few extra key production backgrounds that are going to be, this is how the style is going to look. And those are a lot of fun because you're going back and forth with the director and the producer on that. Doing more so, that's the part of the work that's different. And then everyone else follows your lead. And then after that, you're just kind of managing them from then on. So the color scripting is in the development process is really a lot of fun.
And do you like to do the color script and put it up someplace so you can see the mood of the movie visually?
Yeah. We would have it put it up on the big board. We'd have a lot of meetings and we'd put the color script up with the board so the directors could see it. And in this case, Dan would be looking at it and he'd be kind of going, okay, I like where this is going. And he'd give his input as far as what they want to do. And you kind of go back and forth. And that was the fun part because then you can see everything in color now. Before it was in black and white. Now you're seeing color being scripted through the whole thing. And that's when you see it turning into something.
So here's what I want to know, Ruben. You paint backgrounds. You have a traditional art training. Do you like cartoons? Do you watch cartoons? Because you don't seem like a cartoon watcher.
No, in the beginning I did. in the beginning, I watched it a lot. And, I've talked to a few of the other painters as well. I said, have you watched the show we worked on? You watch it when you're looking at your dailies or whatever, or the print that comes out, and then that's it. I think I used to, but after X amount of years of doing it, it's not the one thing I'm looking at anymore. Maybe, it's the way how things are, how television was and how it is now and everything's streaming. Do we watch TV the way we looked at 20 years ago? It's not the same. So in that regard, no. I mean, I'll still watch a show if I hear like this is a new one that just came on. I'll click it on and go, okay, let's see how this looks. But do I follow it? No. There's some people who are religious about it, which I think is great.
It's their lives. When you were growing up, what cartoons did you watch when you were a kid?
Oh yeah, it was the Bugs Bunny, of course. Which I really liked looking at all the bugs, and Yosemite Sam. And Warner Brothers, because they were on television a lot. And the Tom and Jerry's, the Hanna-Barbera Tom and Jerry's were great. And then, of course, you were always looking forward to going to go see the Disney classics at the theater, because there was no videos or anything during that time. And we didn't have no V8, tapes, CDs or anything. It was, you'd have to go to the theater to see it. So that was the big to-do, to go see Peter Pan, the big screen, or Lady and the Tramp. So, you can kind of oodle for, kind of oogle there and kind of wow, and then just get out of there. I want to do that when I grow up.
I know, and then you kind of fanboy. I don't know if maybe I'm talking about myself, but when I had the opportunity to go to like the Disney lot, the first time you go there, it's magic. It's like you're just a total fanboy, and these are the walkways that Ward Kimball walked down, or Frank and Ollie walked down, any of those guys. And that's the building you talked about. I was in that building, the old animation building years ago that's designed like a hospital. And they used to have flippable scenes, paper on the walls, and the walls are painted with the cartoon characters and stuff. Now it's different. There's still an energy there that
there is. It's still fun to walk around a lot because it's got that old school feel to it, and it kind of lets you know this is how it was back then. Seeing the old animation desks is just priceless because those things they're so well built.
I even still geek out at the Warner Brothers lot when I get to go to the Warner Brothers lot in the water tower and where Termite Terrace used to be and all that stuff. That's always fun.
That was a ton of fun. I remember walking around there when we were working at Iron Giant, and I would go over there. I think Friends was filming on the lot, and we would have our passes would let us get on there, so go to the commissary, so you can kind of go in there. And I'd run into a lot of that whole Friends crew at the time. Just no one knew who they were at the time. Now they're just they're all famous and whatnot, but you can bump elbows with them.
You said something that made me think of people today coming into the industry have no idea how things used to be back when you would work on a show for a season, then you'd go on hiatus, and you'd have to either go find, scramble to find some work, or just wait it out until hopefully the show you worked on got picked up again. Now there's so much going on. There's so many productions. You might have 3 or 4 to choose from or to pick from. To go on to, or to fill in some time, or maybe you pick up freelance, and people are probably calling you all the time going, are you available? Are you available? Can you help me out? And
I mean, it's not always like that. I mean, there are times when you're looking for work. Right now it's busy. It's busy right now. It's going to be that way for several years, I hope, because streaming is still trying to figure itself out. And everyone's throwing productions this left and right. I mean, I'm lined up for another project, even though I formally haven't said yes to them. That never happened, so you're kind of going like, okay, well, just milk it while I can, because it's not always going to be that way. There's going to be those dry spells. And when I first got into the industry, I got into Filmation, and then 9 months later, you got laid off. And there the guy said, this is how it is. We'll come back in 2 to 3 months, and that's just the way it is, And so you kind of figured, okay, and you got used to it after a while.
Well, Mr. Ruben, thank you so much for chatting with me for a little bit. I appreciate you taking the time. And hopefully, Ruben, sometime in the near future we can actually get together for lunch or coffee or
For
something
real.
in person without a face covering or mask or anything.
Yes,
And
yes.
we'll chat face to face.
We will. You take care now.
You too. Thanks, Ruben.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye now.